this is the first of the Kahlenberg Lectures, and there's a few more we're doing this year with Lord Frost, and then after that we've got Sir Right Honourable Steve Baker. Our first and inaugural lecture is with Sir Nick Gibb, who is widely seen in Europe and the world, and especially in the UK, as one of the most transformative education ministers in British history. Long-serving MP. I think arguably, or not arguably, I think you are, or one of the longest-serving schools ministers ever, and really transformed the UK education when he took over as Minister of Schools in 2010. On the PISA rankings, the UK was middle ranked at best. And I think by the time you step down, many years later, through successive governments, by the way, so David Cameron, Theresa May, Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson, which is a testament itself to how effective he was as a schools minister. When you step down, I think the UK was ranked as a top 5, maybe top 6, but a radical transformation, the fortunes of English schools. And when saying that, we're therefore talking about the radical transformation of the lives of hundreds of thousands of young people, if not potentially over that million plus. So really transformative minister in terms of education, maths, science, reading, numeracy, you name it. So it's an absolute honour for me and for Modul and for our broader student community to have you here today, Sir Nick, and to welcome you to Kahlenberg. So I think we have approximately 90 minutes. We may not take all that time because we want to network, and there's a lot of people in the audience I know want to talk to you as well. But this is kind of informal style. So what I'll do is I'll just ask a series of questions, gentle questions, and to draw out some interesting ideas. And then we'll also absolutely focused on student and engagement of the audience. So if any questions come up as we speak, please hold on to them, and then we'll pass the microphone around and you can talk to Sir Nick Gibb about his experiences. So the first opener question I have, Sir Nick, is Professor. Well,
no, you're the professor.
I'm the professor. Sorry. Was in terms of your long political career, if you could identify one major challenge, what would that be, and how did you overcome that challenge?
Challenge that we face in policy terms, or challenge I faced surviving that long?
Well, I mean, it can be in policy terms and or sort of leadership qualities that one has to inhabit to overcome those kinds of challenges. So it's up to you, really.
Well, I mean, I was elected to Parliament when I was 36, and because I wanted to be a member of Parliament, a politician from the age of about 15, and I joined the Conservative student movement at university, and I then became an accountant with KPMG. I was there for 13 years, but I always wanted to be a member of Parliament after that. And so I was in the House of Commons at 36. And, politics is a tough business. And the challenge you have to overcome being a member of Parliament is dealing with the media. It got worse. I was elected in 1997 before most people in this room were a twinkle in their parents' eye. But in those days, members of Parliament were treated better than they are today. The social media, the mainstream media, they're very aggressive towards politicians. And so dealing with that came as something of a shock. I was brought up interested in politics. I admired Margaret Thatcher, I admired Ronald Reagan, and it was they were my heroes. That's where I went into politics. And then to get into politics, and you find you're subject to this new kind of pressure, that was a challenge you had to overcome. So we have a parliamentary system in Britain. So all our ministers in government have to be members of Parliament, either in the lower house, the elected house, or in the House of Lords, which is an appointed house. So in 2010, I did become a minister. I'd never been a minister before. I don't think, though David Cameron, the Prime Minister, had never been a minister before. So we had to learn how to be ministers. And again, that is a challenge, how you deal with the bureaucracy. But what I learned, we'd done a lot of work in opposition. So I was a shadow schools minister for 5 years, between 2005 and 2010. And so we spent a lot of that time working, preparing for government. And we can talk about that. I mean, I was worried about, we were declining in PISA. This is the OECD's big survey of education that happens every 3 years in all OECD countries and beyond, more than just the OECD take part. About 80 countries take part in this survey. And we were, in 2000, in the first year, we were doing very well in Britain. We were 4th in science, we were 7th in reading, we were 8th in maths. Trouble was, by 2003, we were declining. And in 2006, we were declining. By 2009, we were 28th in maths and 25th in reading. So something was going wrong. So the challenge then was to work out why, what was going on with our schools. And I spent the next 5 years, I spent the whole 5 years of opposition years, visiting schools every Monday, talking to head teachers, talking to teachers, challenging them to try and understand what had gone wrong. And I came to a very firm view, which we can maybe draw out in questions.
Well, then that leads naturally to the question, in terms of your diagnostic of what was wrong. What was wrong?
Thank you for asking that question. What was wrong was an ideology. And I say this is one thing that I've learned about being an MP for 27 years, is most things that go wrong in politics and public service is an ideology. And I say to any, particularly if you're on this sort of centre right of politics, look for the ideology, because that's where the problem is causing, whether it's housing, whether it's economy, whatever it is. Bad ideology will be driving bad policy. So what I discovered from visiting schools is that there was an ideology of education, which I in shorthand call progressivism, that was causing the damage to our school system. What is progressivism? I struggled to know what that was. I knew instinctively that it was something to do with this ideology. I then read a book by E.D. Hirsch, an American academic, called The Schools We Need and Why We Don't Have Them. And that explained progressivist education. It comes from the philosophy of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, 18th century romantic philosopher, and Teachers College, Columbia in New York, people like John Dewey, who basically said that academic education is less important than, learning by discovery and inquiry learning, and hard work and bookish study is not really what is necessary. All that will do is contaminate the next generation and stop them being creative. And I saw a lot of that in the schools I was visiting. There was less focus on academic study. The curriculum was, very weak, particularly for children from disadvantaged areas. The way they taught reading was ineffective. There were too many children at age 9, 10 still struggling with the basics of reading. So I learned a lot about this, which is unusual. I'm an accountant by training. I did a law degree, and here I am getting into the weeds of how teachers teach, which annoyed some teachers. But I made the point, look, the evidence is that I'm gathering is that the way you teach reading isn't working for many, many children. And they were learning through a thing called whole language teaching of reading. And the evidence says that phonics is the way to teach reading. So you teach children the 44 sounds of the alphabet and how to blend those sounds into words. It's common sense in my view. But the evidence from a number of studies was absolutely compelling that that's how you teach reading. So when we came into office, we basically changed the law. And we required primary school teachers to be trained in phonics, to be qualified. We changed the curriculum to require it in our primary schools. We brought in a test for 6-year-olds. That was controversial. And this test was 40 words, half of which were not real words, to make sure that these 6-year-olds, after 18 months at school, could decode using phonics. And when we first introduced the test in 2012, 58% of children passed, 32 correctly read words out of 40. It's a one-to-one test, 6-year-old to their own teacher. And which meant that nearly half of children, after 18 months at school, couldn't read a simple word. And so every year it went up, and by just before COVID, it was 82% passed the test. And then it dipped with COVID, and it's gone back up again. And then if they don't pass it in year 1, they have to retake it in year 2, and that goes up to 92% if you include the retakes. And as a consequence of that policy, England's 9-year-olds and another international test called PEARLS, Performance in Reading Literacy, we are 4th in the world. We were 16th, and now we're 4th. and that is attributed to the phonics work we did. And the great thing is that we went up so high because of the low attainers. Their results went up significantly. So yeah, anyway, I could waffle on forever. I'll let you ask another question.
Well, listening to that is absolutely fascinating. But it sounds to me, I mean, what would you say to the criticism that kind of educational style would perhaps not work that well with children from more disadvantaged backgrounds? I mean, what would you say to that? Perhaps that strong criticism that you no doubt faced. How would you deal with that idea?
Well, nothing could be further from the truth. They are the children that most benefit from this approach. Because if you come from a middle class educated family, the chances are you've learned to read at home. And one of the things that annoys me is that figure of 82%, it conceals something. The disadvantaged children, for children who qualify for free school meals, it's 72%, which you say, well, that makes your point. No, it doesn't, because learning to read, you get passing the phonics check is a simple mechanical thing. It's not reading. It's the necessary precondition for reading. It's word reading. So if it's taught, anyone can learn it, no matter what their intelligence, no matter what their ability, no matter what their background. And the fact there is a gap shows me that in middle class areas, in prosperous areas, the state schools are not teaching it properly, and they get a good result because their children learn at home. But the 1 or 2 children, or the 20 or 30 children of that school who don't have this advantage, they don't pass. So I spend a lot of time, making sure that the way teachers teach reading in our schools is better. And we rolled out a lot of training programs, a lot of school to school helping other schools that aren't doing as well. So I know absolutely. And the other thing that we did, we haven't touched on, is the importance of knowledge in the curriculum. We had a type of curriculum called a competence-based curriculum that taught higher order skills at the expense of deep knowledge. And of course, the children that fare worse from a competence-based curriculum are children who don't get knowledge at home. And the book I mentioned, E.D. Hirsch, he talks about knowledge building on knowledge. So the more knowledge you have, the more knowledge you can acquire, like Velcro, he says. But children who come from homes where they don't go to the theatre, they don't discuss books, they don't have university, college graduates as parents, they come to school not knowing much. And so they're already at a disadvantage when they start. And then if you have a curriculum that doesn't teach knowledge as its prime focus, that gap between them and the advantage peers grows and grows. And that's what we had to address.
So, broaden this out somewhat then. It sounds to me, obviously, education can be deeply transformative of one's life. But if we move beyond that in terms of how you saw the role of education in society, and obviously we live in a very interdependent world. I know that you're very busy. You've literally flown in from Australia. You've come to us. You're off somewhere else, and then so I know that you do a lot of work internationally. So in this interesting, changing world order that we live in, of multipolarity and changes in the international system, if you could relate that to the role of education, obviously you must see differences in different educational styles. But also, what role do you see education more broadly, as philosophically at least, in a changing world order?
Well, you can't have a strong economy if you haven't got a strong education system. And so human capital is what drives the economy. It's being innovative. It's inventing new products, new services, and all that is driven by intellectual. Cognitive knowledge and having higher order thinking skills. So there is a global debate happening about these issues that I've just been touching on. The OECD has this notion of the 21st century skills. So they say that what all economies need around the world are critical thinking skills, problem solving skills, creativity. And they are right. Those are absolutely critical skills in any modern strong economy, particularly Britain, Austria. Many of our industries in Britain are, the film, music, fashion. They depend on creativity, and so the argument is from the OECD that you just teach those skills directly. The problem is cognitive science says you can't do that. That the only way you get these skills is through deep knowledge, deep domain knowledge. And this debate is happening. So it's happening in New Zealand and Australia, having this debate between teaching high order skills and teaching knowledge-rich curriculum. The education minister in New Zealand, Erica Stanford, has just introduced a knowledge-rich curriculum. There are a number of states in the United States, Texas, there's a thing called the Mississippi Miracle. So they have moved towards knowledge rich, they have moved towards phonics, teaching and reading, and their results have soared in the NAEP scores in America. They've just introduced a knowledge rich curriculum in Flanders and Belgium. They are introducing it in Northern Ireland. So around the world, this debate is happening. And I think it's a really important debate. I'll just give you an example of India. So I've been to India a few times to speak at conferences, and I make all these points about the importance of knowledge. And we have, I think, at some point, if you're interested, we can talk about why knowledge really matters. But you go to India, and they have a very terrible education system that's very old-fashioned in the sense that the kids just have to learn these facts by heart and things. And so they think knowledge is terrible, and they are really, really enthused by a kind of competence-based curriculum. And it breaks your heart, because I can see why they're fed up with their own system. So bad knowledge-rich curriculum, bad direct teaching is bad. But you don't replace bad direct teaching and bad knowledge curriculum with a competence-based curriculum. You teach it with good knowledge-rich curriculum and good direct instruction teaching. And so India they're very taken by all this. I worry about that, because that's an economy that is growing at 7 or 8% a year. It should be growing more, but it won't achieve its ambitions if it doesn't, understand this issue, in my judgment.
I think I'd like to widen this out a little bit now, right? We have students here that come from all across the world. We have a very diverse student base, and many of our students are fantastic, at the very top of their game, and they'll go back to their respective countries and enter business and leadership and other areas like that. It's a thing we wish to inculcate amongst our student body. So whilst you're here, I think it would be remiss of me not to ask you a question about leadership. You've obviously led the very highest level, a member of parliament, a long-term minister, and you've led massive institutional change that's impacted the lives of 1 million plus people. And if you include the parents, a lot more. You've transformed those lives. That's a massive journey. That's a massive thing to have achieved. So if we widen this out now a bit to talk about leadership, if you could unpack, what leadership means for you, what kind of qualities, and how did you apply this to your career, and what did you learn?
Well, I think it's understanding the issue. A lot of people go into politics and they think it's a game of communications, and it really isn't. It's only really become that since the 90s, since we've had 24-hour news, and now we have social media. And a lot of politicians think that that's all it's about, superficial, and it isn't. It really isn't. And I think this applies to any field that you're in, that you have to understand the thing that you're leading. What is your vision for the thing? And it needs to be based on a proper understanding. It takes work to understand, the direction in which you're taking the institution that you're leading. So for us, and I say this about any government department as well, if you're in the housing department or you're in the health department, the first thing to identify is what is the problem that you've been sent there as a minister or a chief executive to sort out. And so first of all, identify the problem. And then you've got to work out what the solution is. And the solution will come from your analysis of the problem. In our education system, there was a problem with declining standards. It was the PISA results. It was the fact that universities said that undergraduates were less well prepared. Employers were saying people were starting work, they couldn't. Their math was terrible. Their writing ability was appalling. So we knew we had a problem to address. Then you need to understand why was this happening? What has happened in the last previous 20 years that had led us to these problems. So you need to understand that. So then you've understood the problem, you've understood the cause of the problem. Then you need to understand how to deal with the cause of, how to eradicate that problem. And each of these things are really hard. Life is not a superficial take a photograph, put it on Twitter. That is not leadership. You have to do those things because we live in a modern world and you have to use all these skills of communication, of course. But you should be communicating something fundamental, something serious, something real. And authenticity, I think, is crucial in every field that you're in. Just playing a game is not real. So that would be my lesson in every field. Just understand what you're doing. There's just a side issue. There's a university that's local to me in the city of London, where I live. It's called the Cass. It was called Cass. It changed its name because it turned out Cass was a slave dealer. So they changed the name of the university to the business school to Bayes Business School in St George University. And I met a professor of entrepreneurism there. And I said, I fancied running a chain of restaurants at one stage in my life. And he said, you would have been a disaster because you don't have domain knowledge. So you need domain knowledge to be an entrepreneur in the domain that you're being an entrepreneur in. And I think that applies to everything. You just got to know your stuff. You've got to know, the thing, you've got to understand the thing you're leading.
That's fantastic. I think we'll open, I know there's lots of people here with questions, but we'll open up now to the floor. And so if you have a question for Nick, then please raise your hand and have your question.
Well, I don't think character is something that you teach, it's something that you catch. I've written a book about all this called Reforming Lessons, and in that we talk about one of the secretaries of state I worked with was really obsessed by character education. The trouble is, it's very difficult to teach it. Some of the best schools in England, which are some of the best schools in the world, some of their alumni end up in jail, all kinds of, So there are things you can do, but not as part of the curriculum. I wouldn't say you should have a character education curriculum. Character is about having positions of responsibility in the school as a student, playing sport, and making sure that you don't give up and learn to understand failure. So I think that was where, I mean, our great independent schools, about 7% of students in Britain are educated in the private sector, and some of the world's greatest schools like Eton, College Harrow, Winchester. The thing that makes them great is their academic achievement, but they also have Eton has provided about 20 odd prime ministers of our country. So they do something more, and it's those extracurricular things that they do that helps deliver the character. The state sector doesn't really have the resources to enable that. And when people say focus on character or focus on this or focus on that, I always say, well, our state schools finish at 3 o'clock, 3:30. What are you going to take out of the day to focus on these other things, important though they may be? And and they end up taking out academic things. And for children from disadvantaged backgrounds, that academic attainment is absolutely the most important thing that will affect their lives. And I have these battles all the time. Doesn't mean to say I don't agree with what you're saying. It's just sometimes it's an opportunity cost that's sometimes too high if you promote things. But I don't disagree. I think that character comes from those other things beyond the curriculum that the school should be inculcating. I think behaviour is very important. We had a big focus on improving behaviour in schools. If you've got a school whether it's a middle class area or a posh area or a disadvantaged area, if the behaviour is bad, which it has been in a lot of schools in our country, they're not going to learn anything. So there's a concept that's come up in our school system called warm strict. So they enforce the rules very strictly, but it's very warm. It isn't just shouting at the children strictness. It's a loving strictness. We want you to behave, do your homework, get to here on time, wear your tie properly. Not because we hate you, but because we love you. We want you to do well, and that's warm strict. It's a very successful behaviour philosophy in some of the best schools in the state sector. Well, I think countries like Austria, Britain, we shouldn't um, we shouldn't be dismissive of our political structures and democracy. I went around the parliament today, and it's a wonderful building, but if it's not the building that matters, it's what happens inside. And it's, sometimes in the Western democracies, we kind of lost confidence in ourselves, and we've got to get that confidence back because there is no, in my view, there is no better system of government in the world than democracy, parliamentary democracy. There's no better economic system than the free market and capitalism. But both these things, if you look at polling, don't do well in polling of young people. They're very dismissive, some young people around the world, of capitalism, seen as a dirty word. But capitalism creates wealth. Wealth is a very dirty word amongst some Gen Z and others. But wealth is really important. Wealth buys clean water, it buys hospitals, it buys schools, it buys roads, it buys warm houses, food, nutrition. So why would you be against wealth? So I think we need to have more confidence in our country. Come to Austria, come to Vienna, because we believe in democracy, we believe in the free market. Oh, by the way, some of the world's greatest living, not living, some of the world's greatest dead composers, and some living ones as well, come from Vienna. There's something very wonderful about this city and this country that we should be very proud of. And I think we need a bit more of that confidence in England and Britain as well. We've had, the trouble with going back to the media, the challenges I said we face as being a member of parliament, the media is just, and particularly social media, not just social media, mainstream media as well. They are aggressive, the interviewers. They don't really think their job is to convey, to inform people what's going on. They think their job is to beat up the minister so they can get clicks on their social media account and get more followers. And so I think the media has lost its way in the West. So we've got to get that back, and we've got to get politicians taking themselves seriously and to be authentic and sincere. I don't know if you have programs here like In the Thick of It, there's a British comedy program about politics, and it's very cynical. I think cynicism is the worst thing. We need to get rid of that and then just have this confidence. But I can see why people from the former Soviet republics would want to come and be educated in Vienna. It's a wonderful, it's a free country with a history of freedom, and so that's it's very important. But we've had the same. We've had university policy shifting between the business department because it's about the economy, and then shifting back to the education department. So I don't think it matters really. The people get obsessed by the machinery of government of which department. What matters is the policy. I never had university education in my portfolio. We've had all kinds of issues about the quality of some of the universities that lower down in what we call the sort of lower tariff, the universities that require lower grades to get in. We had a big expansion of our university system in the 60s, then we had another expansion in the 90s, and I worry that some of those later expansions were teaching subjects for which they were not founded, really. They were founded for very good reasons, and often vocational, technical education, and they've shifted into academic, and they've not done that very well. So, and then the other big issue we have in England in UK is university funding, and we, as a coalition government, we increased the fees very significantly in 2010 on students, up to £9,000 per year per course, per student. And that was very controversial, and it damaged our coalition partner in our coalition because they pledged not to do that, and then they did it because they had to compromise on things for coalition. So it's very difficult, and in those lower tariff universities, you've got young people leaving university with a great deal of debt and a graduate degree that doesn't get them into the graduate jobs that they had hoped. So there are all kinds of issues like that we've had to tackle. But we have some of the best universities in the world. We have 4 universities in the world's top 10. We have UCL, LSE, Imperial, Oxford, Cambridge. So our university sector is good, and it's one of the reasons why Britain has quite a lot of international soft power. It's our university, and it's the fashion and its music and so on that is really good for our reputation internationally. But they do struggle at the moment with funding. Some of the universities are really struggling financially.
Just as a side note, just to say that Modul was just done an agreement with Oxford University. So some of our students will be going to Oxford University every single year, which is fantastic.
Do a master's.
Undergraduate. So
really?
they've got 1 term or 2 terms, or even a full year. So that's a great new issue. Roya.
It's a really important question in that the current world we live in, with people moving around the world much more frequently than they used to do. One of the reasons I believe so much in a knowledge-rich curriculum is that it is important for integration purposes that children are taught the history of Austria. They need to know all the things that children that have been here for generations, their families know. But because otherwise they can't have they can't participate in the national conversation. And that's what Hirsch talks about in his book, The Schools We Need, is that they need to be able to participate in that national conversation. And you can't do that if the school has not taught the important events that happened that made Austria the country that it is today. And also some of the important things that happen in the world that has made Austria the country it is today. They need to be taught the same things that more indigenous children have been taught. So that's why I believe very strongly in a knowledge-rich curriculum. You can't just teach the skills of thinking like a historian if you expect somehow those children will acquire that knowledge in some other way. So in England, interestingly, when I was in office, we had to create 1 million more school places. And to put that in perspective, we have about 7 or 8 million students overall, pupils, children under 18. And we had to create 1 million places to deal with the birth rate and immigration. And actually, the children that perform the best are the children of immigrant families, which is counterintuitive in many ways, with all the struggles that they have to the new home and so on. But the truth is, they work hard because these are families that have uprooted their whole lives. And I, having been an immigrant myself, and as a child, we moved to Canada when I was 7 for a couple of years and came back. It is a big thing to do that. And so the children of those families, they are encouraged by their parents to work hard at school. So actually, all the data we have in England is that if you are a child that speaks English as their second language, additional language, they outperform particularly white working class children academically in our school. So when a head teacher says to me, and I'm visiting a school, "Oh, Minister, we have 47 languages in this school. Don't expect us to get good results." I said, "Well, the data says that if you've got 47 languages in your school, you should be outperforming all the other schools. So don't give me that excuse." So, but every country has its own challenges. It depends on how good the German is when they come to Austria, and how quickly they can pick up the language when they. I probably didn't convey what I was trying to say well enough. So, I mean, India did so poorly in PISA that it pulled out, I think in 2009. And they debate going back into it, and then they lose the confidence to do that. But the trouble is when you have discussions at conferences like this or other conferences in India, they do talk about moving towards a competence-based curriculum where you teach the skills, higher order thinking skills, which sounds logical in the modern economy because you do want those skills. The trouble is we did that in England. We did that formally in 2007 with our competence-based curriculum that was introduced by one of our so-called independent bodies that we then abolished because they did that. But even before that, schools had moved in that direction because intellectually that was the zeitgeist that was dominating education policy. And it failed miserably and it failed particularly children from disadvantaged backgrounds. And there was one survey done of undergraduates at Cardiff University in 2009, and he asked his undergraduates, so there were a series of quiz questions about history, and they just didn't know things. 88% of them could not name a single British 19th century prime minister. And we have some very famous 19th century prime ministers that every school child would have known a couple of generations ago. Robert Peel, Disraeli, Gladstone. They hadn't heard of any of these people. These are undergraduates. So we are absolutely convinced by the cognitive science that knowledge, getting children knowing a lot of science, having very sophisticated mathematics, having read a lot of literature, knowing a lot about history and geography. If you do that, if you have an education system that's committed to that, guess what happens? Those children leave school as critical thinkers. They leave school as problem solvers. They leave school with creativity because they've been exposed to and introduced to all the great literature and the great music around the world. The schools that concentrate on teaching those skills, those kids leave school not having those skills. So it is counterintuitive and a difficult argument to make, but it's a really important one. And let me just, I'll just beg your patience for one more minute while I just explain the breakthrough moment intellectually that we had as politicians in opposition when we were devising our strategy. And that is a book by Daniel Willingham called Why Don't Students Like School? And his work is based on the work of John Sweller, a cognitive scientist in Australia. And what Willingham says is that, and John Sweller and other cognitive scientists, is that the working memory, that's where your critical thinking takes place, in problem solving and your creativity. It's in the working memory. But the working memory can only handle 5 or 6 new pieces of information. You can only remember 5 or 6 new pieces of information. It's very small. And the example I use is if I gave you a phone number, you could probably recite it back. If I gave you 30 phone numbers, you couldn't recite those back to me. That's because your working memory isn't big enough. You could probably, over your lifetime, you probably got 30 phone numbers stored in your long-term memory, but instantly you couldn't recall it. But if you're critically thinking about something, you need more than 5 bits of information to be able to work out the solution to world peace, or find a cure for cancer, or write the great English novel. So what Willingham says is that the purpose of an education is to get knowledge into your long-term memory. And then the long-term memory, then the short working memory can draw on that knowledge without overloading itself. It's called cognitive load theory. And John Sweller, incidentally, is a guest on the wonderful podcast called Chalk and Talk. And he's the great guru of cognitive load theory. So that's just wanted to, there is a massive body of science that says why knowledge is so important, but it's very counterintuitive to logic, and it's counterintuitive to what's happening all around the world through the OECD. But there's a lot of countries now, as I said, that are challenging it, and the ones that do successfully are the ones that are going to outperform. They're going to provide the best education for their population. It's an important question, and so AI is a useful tool, no question. It's going to save industry billions of pounds of costs in doing things for them, but it doesn't change the fact that you need knowledge in your long-term memory, and you cannot subcontract thinking to a machine if you yourself want to be a critical thinker. And the idea that you can set a student an essay, and I know nobody here does that, you then ask AI to produce the essay for you, you then read what comes out of the machine, and you play with this, and you try and understand what you've read, what the thing has produced. And you think, if you can get away with it, that you have educated yourself by doing that. You've learned to use AI effectively, and you produce the most perfect essay that you were asked to produce, but actually you've learned nothing because you haven't done the work, the reading that has enabled you to write that essay, and you have not written it. And learning to write is a skill that took me all my school career and 10 years at KPMG before I could really write. And so you will leave, if you do that, any student, I'm not saying you're going to do that, and you're definitely not going to do that, but tell about the quality of your question. But if students do that, they might as well just not bother going to university, because you'll have a degree, but you will be useless. You won't have any of those skills that employers want. And then you have this argument that people make, that why do you have to teach, why do you have to stuff these kids full of knowledge when they can just look it up on AI, look it up on Google? Why do you need it? You need it because you don't get the skills, so don't have that knowledge. You can't keep looking up what 7/6 are, or what the capital of Austria is, or what the boiling point of water is. You just need to know that stuff, and a whole lot more, if you're going to be useful in a post-AI world. Because what employers will want are thinkers. And you don't become a thinker if you don't have anything to think about. First of all, the whole child. I don't disagree with that. We do want children to have ethical values, resilience, to understand their mental health. Absolutely, and that's what a good school will do. Some of the best schools will do all kinds of extracurricular activities, co-curricular activities, and I absolutely agree with that. What I worry is when that becomes part of the curriculum at the expense of learning about the halogens and so on. I think that's the issue. And if it's a choice between one or the other, because you've got limited resources and children are far behind and can't read at the age of 11 or something, sometimes you have to deal with those issues, because they are life and death issues for those children. They are life in jail type issues for those children. But for a good school that's doing good things academically, then they should be doing those things as well. I believe very strongly in a really rich music education in schools, good extracurricular stuff in plays and drama, good sport happening, so children understand about the importance of exercise and health, and they actually do it, not just learn about it. In terms of your question, Mr. Husband, I don't think I ever have said that education is just about being a good business person and producing products and services for the economy. It does have that impact, but it's not the main purpose. The main purpose is to create an educated society. We need to pass on to the next generation all that this generation and the last 100 generations has learned. It's why I'm against inquiry learning and project-based learning, because why would you get some child to try and invent from scratch Newton's laws when we already have them? We just teach them. There's a book by Jack Gross saying just tell them. But education isn't just about producing economic units for the future. It is about those just learning from standing on the shoulders of giants, whether it's giants who are scientists, as in that quote from Newton, or whether it's the giants of Shakespeare and Mozart and so on. We want children to know all this stuff, really, beyond just simple science and maths and functional issues, definitely. We have a young man back. He's been trying to ask us. Well. I do think the thing that I said earlier, that AI is saving companies money. We're saving companies money by not taking on new graduates to do jobs that the AI can do, because you're a young graduate starting in a company. You don't have the experience and skills that a top law firm wants. And the stuff you do normally as a trainee, a lawyer, is now can be done by AI. So I don't know where we're going with this, and I don't think anyone does. The trouble is that you don't get that experience. As those senior lawyers retire, they've got to be replaced by somebody. If you haven't spent the last 20 years nurturing the next generation of lawyers because you've cut costs by using AI, you're going to have a problem in the long term as a business. But I don't know where we're going, and what's happening in the UK is exactly that really good graduates are struggling to get into the job market. My free market, beliefs is that the market will adjust to that in time. The trouble is AI has come on so rapidly. I mean, this wasn't even an issue while I was a minister, and I only stopped in 2003. I mean, it was an emerging issue. I remember somebody saying to me, LLM. I said, what's LLM? You know, I didn't know. So it's all brand new, and so I think policymakers are struggling to catch up with this. And there's a pessimistic view and there's an optimistic view, and we just don't know the answer to it. But I still think it's worth going to university, because you're not here just to get a degree certificate. You're here to become a thinker. In theory, you have spent your school career acquiring knowledge, and then latterly at school, some ability to think. Here you're taught to think. And what we do need are people that can think in the modern world. Your question was about politics. How do you deal with the short term? The boring answer is that actually education rarely features politically. And I say to all the ministers I talk to around the world, if they want some snippets of advice, is you need the Prime Minister on your side. We could not have done what we did in Britain, Michael Gove and I, if we hadn't got the Prime Minister, David Cameron, behind us. And he understood it, absolutely understood what we're trying to do intellectually. Because it is controversial with teacher unions, with vast swathes of teachers who simply don't agree. And so you need that backing politically. And we had a great advantage, which is the advantage Austria has right now, is that we were in a coalition. You think, well, that's not an advantage, that's a pain. You're the majority, you know. Actually, being in coalition helps you introduce controversial measures. Because if you can bring your coalition partner with you, whether they're to the right or to the left of you, you have to be really good at getting that policy right before you launch it. And so we got a lot of controversial things through because we have the coalition behind us. So, but you have to. I was a minister for 10 years, and that's unusual in politics. But it does help because sometimes the civil servants don't really understand what they're doing. Frankly, they're good at delivery, they're not good at policy. So having me there, saying we're going to continue on, we're going to continue producing this multiplication tables check, even though we've been piloting it year after year. For a minister to come in and replace me, they could have easily scrap that. So it is longevity, I think, is quite important. And then you gain the rewards. You also gain the worry. So I've been a minister for nearly 10 years when we had the first Pearls results. So this was a test of the reading ability of 9-year-olds. And I built my career reputation on phonics and reading. And here was this test coming out. Were we going to go up or were we going to go down? And so there was I had nowhere to hide. If it had gone down, I would have gone down. Fortunately, it went up. And then a year later, then we had the maths, the PISA, that focused on maths in 2022. And again, it could have gone either way. And thank goodness it went the right way. So what would I do? The big issue at the moment is post-COVID attendance. Attendance rates are not where they should be. And there's a big chunk of children who are persistently absent. And one of the reasons for that is, straight away after COVID, I was there and I was more sympathetic to kids because they'd fallen behind. There's a lot of mental health issues, and we had to nurture them back into school. Now I think we need to be a bit tougher with the parents. And then with a lot of parents working at home, of course, if you have a cold, you stay at home if you're a young kid, primary school kid. Whereas in my day, parents working, I'm sorry, I don't care if you've got a cold. You can only stay at home if you're on death's door and you have a temperature of 100 and something. Then you can stay at home. So there is that issue. I think attendance is an absolute priority. And I think then beyond that, we need to get the reading. Even though we've achieved all this stuff in reading, there's still more to do. And there are certain segments of society and children from different groups in England, particularly white working class boys, who are not getting the results they should be getting. We need to really focus on getting their results up. Yeah, so AI is an issue, and those youngsters at school or university who are using AI to write their essays, they're only cheating themselves. If I were at a school, I would just make the point ethically. Do it, but you might as well not bother because you're learning nothing. And in terms of the way the schools are structured, there are some schools now I know that don't set homework. Now, homework is really important, but they do set homework, but they make them do it at school. So the school day has been extended to 5 p.m. And in that last hour and a bit, they're just doing their homework, and they're not allowed to use their phones to do that homework. So they have no access to AI to write those essays. So I think that's the kind of thing you can do. And I think more and more exams are going to have to be in exam conditions. This idea that you can have continual assessment where your grade is determined by the essays that you've written over the course. I think that's gone, as far as I'm concerned, if you want those results to have validity. Because, as I said, we want children to be learning things, young people to be learning things, not just those essays are of no use to anybody. They're no use to the university. They're no use to the school. They're no use to the teacher. They don't sell the essay. You don't make money from your essay that you've written as your assignment. They're there for one purpose, which is to teach you to read and get the knowledge, and then to learn to write and to marshal an argument. That's the purpose of the exercise. It's not just to produce the essay.
Well, I would think that we've covered so much in today's first inaugural Kahlenberg lecture, from character building to education and knowledge and the challenges of AI and future careers. So I just want to really thank you, Sir Nick Gibb, for coming to us for this lecture and for giving us your time and your wisdom. And let's please put our hands together to thank Sir Nick. Thank you so much.